polar regions are very important for Portugal. I mean, not because Portugal is a small country in Europe, but the polar regions are globally important. And Portuguese scientists are really concerned about what is happening in the world, what are the impacts that climate change is having also in Portugal, for instance, related to increasing coastal erosion, issues associated with salinization linked to increased sea level. And therefore the scientific community joined together, especially in the early 2000s. And during the IPY there was a huge boost in interest in the polar region. So several researchers joined together and started promoting the importance of polar science near to the funding agencies, but also to the global public, to the world public, through several outreach programs. And currently Portugal is involved with different countries. We have various partners in a number of disciplines, and there are several applications which we are developing in international programs, both in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, which can also be applied to Portugal. I mean, not only issues related to the application of new technologies, like observations using UAVs, high-resolution remote sensing, but also issues related to, for instance, fisheries, which can have applications elsewhere in the world. So what is happening in the polar regions influences also what happens in Portugal, and Portugal also wants to give a contribution to the global understanding of the changing polar regions. Polar research is a very important topic for Europe. There are huge consequences about what happens in the polar regions, more directly of what happens in the Arctic, essentially due to its linkages with climate in Europe. Europe is very directly influenced by the Arctic Ocean and also by the Northern Atlantic Ocean. And those changes are impacting also the European climate. Of course, the European interests in the polar regions are much wider than only the impacts that we have in the continent itself. But we have, for instance, settlements in Arctic and subarctic regions with indigenous people. We have also, of course, economical interests in the Arctic, so Europe must be interested about what is happening. And another very important issue is that Europe is one of the largest infrastructure, both on the Arctic and Antarctic research, and therefore, united as Europeans, I think we can have a huge strength in the global working force in research in the polar regions. Some key issues which are really straightforward to indicate are related to the fast-changing Arctic, essentially changes in sea ice and its impacts on transportation routes, on the economy, but also impacts on the climate associated with changes in sea ice, changes in albedo, ocean currents, and of course changes also on glaciers. So what is happening to Greenland, that is central to Europe, but also what is happening in Antarctica. How fast is the Antarctic Peninsula changing? Glaciers, we know that glaciers are melting much faster than was thought a few years ago, and the importance of Europe, it's very high on the global scene on polar research. On the other hand, also permafrost research, and permafrost is one of the largest storages of carbon. And we now know, since about 1 decade ago, that there are huge amounts of carbon within Arctic permafrost. And in fact, permafrost should be also one of the main goals of polar research within Europe and internationally.